Okay, the time now is 6:30, and so far we have 83, 84 participants. This is David Fan from HASF. So we have Ben Harding and Howie here, and I think you can all see the first slide, which is the PowerPoint of tonight. So you can see Howie and Ben as the presenter. So Ben, shall I pass the stage to you?
Okay. Thank you, David, and a very warm welcome to you all to this seminar tonight, the HKSF presentation on the 2025 to 2028 racing rules of sailing. With me, I have Howie Suen, who's also going to be a co-presenter, and
Hi, everyone.
we hope you enjoy the evening and get something out of it. Just as David said, I hope you can all see this presentation. I'm going to just see what happens if I press my spacebar and try and get to the next slide. How does that look, David? Have you got the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's great. So let's go back to that one then. As you can see, the aim is to try and get this done within an hour, give or take a few minutes either side. There's a QR code there, which I'll explain in a moment, but as it says, the QR code will link to the latest racing rules of sailing, I think, on the World Sailing website. If any of you want to follow along with your world racing rules on your phone or whatever, you can QR code that now and have a look. That QR code will stay up for a few minutes. Let's move on here. Our aims tonight are to introduce Hong Kong sailors to the new rules. Our aim, that's the only aim. Who are we useful for? Well, we're useful to all sailors. We're not going to be looking at the appendices. We're not looking at the special rules for match racing or team racing. We're going to stick to the main part of the rule book. So to try and make it available to most people here. How are we going to get through this tonight? We're going to study the rules which have changed since the last Racing Rules of Sailing, which was in 2021 to 2024. We're going to ignore the changes which don't really affect the way you sail. In which case we're going to focus on what we call the game changes. Those are the changes which might affect how you sail in the race. Throughout this presentation, you're going to see red, which we use to emphasize the new rules or to highlight comparisons between the old and the new rules. And I'll just say that we're not going to be pausing. This is not a rules session as to teach people all the basic rules from zero to the end. We're actually only really going to focus on the change of rules in the 2025 to 2028 edition. So let's keep going with that. One more thing here. Because we've got quite a lot to get through in an hour, we're not going to stop for too many questions along the way. We're going to try and get through this session. If you have a question, use the Zoom chat feature or remember it until the end. And if we have any time at the end, we'll try and address them. So let's try and get through what we've got and address the questions at the end. I think that's the fairest for most people. Lastly, before we get on with this, the disclaimer. The content which we're presenting tonight is really our interpretation. The rules haven't even come into effect. So we haven't got official case books. We haven't got the official corrections out yet. What we're going to give you tonight is our interpretation of what we've seen of the new rules. What we tell you might be wrong. They might change. We're sorry for that. We can't really help that. That's the way it works. In fact, I can tell you that some of the changes have already been made. Some corrections have already been made since the July edition from World Sailing. So there may be some changes tonight in your own. Some of you might have the 2025 rule book already. There might be some small changes here and there, even in tonight's presentation. But we'll do our best. Okay, I hope with that in mind, we can just get going. Some background. Why do we have new rules? Well, the racing rules of sailing are updated by World Sailing every 4 years. They're updated after the Olympics. So they coincide with the Olympic sailing. I think what they don't want is the Olympic sailors to have to worry about sailing with new rules. So they use the Olympic year, and after the Olympics are finished, that's when they make the changes for the next 4 years. We had the Olympics this year, and so this year is also the new rules year. Why do we have them? Well, they fix minor errors, typos, and spelling mistakes in the rule books. They keep up with technology. There may be new sail materials out, there may be new boats coming out. So the rules need changing as the technology changes. The updates keep up with racing trends, and they close any loopholes. For every rule that's written, there's probably some sailor out there trying to find a way to use the rules to his advantage or her advantage, and sometimes those weren't intended by the rule makers, and there's a loophole. So the rule makers in the next 4 years, they want to try and close that loophole. And overall, the updates really are there just to try and improve the sport for everyone, try and improve the sport for the sailors, to try and improve the sport for the competitors as well. The 2025 rules come effective on the 1st of January 2025. So just to remind you guys, if you're sailing in 2024, you're sailing under the old rules. What we say tonight doesn't come effective until next year. It always catches a few people out. For those of you who are following or who have got the rule book open, either on a PDF or the real rule book, the new one, you'll find that the changes are depicted by this revision bar in the right-hand corner of each page where there's a change. So that little bar there will tell you that that rule has been changed since the last edition. And pretty much that's what we have focused on, is rules where there's that bar exists. The QR code is the same QR code from the front page. If anyone wants to, as I say, follow along using, reading the rule 2025 rules in their book, probably this is about your last chance to scan the QR code. Righty-ho. Well, in that case, I think we'll just get started. I'm going to start with a summary. Most people finish with a summary. I'm going to start with a summary. We're going to have a quick look at what we expect tonight, what we expect in these 2025 to 28 rules. We're going to see that there's quite a lot of renumbering of rules, rewording. This renumbering and rewording is not really a massive problem for sailors. It's a big problem for people who have lots of materials and presentations and what have you, and based on the rules, because it means I've got to go through all of those and renumber and reword all my presentations. It's a big problem for people who like remembering rules, because now we have to remember new numbers and words. But actually, all of this doesn't really do much in the way of your sailing, so don't worry too much. We've got 2 new definitions to the racing rules and some changes to existing definitions. Howie will take us through some of those later. As I mentioned, we don't have many game changes this year. Some years there's a lot of things to think about on the water. This year, there's not that many, but there are a few. So keep an eye on those. There is a major restructuring of Part 5. Part 5 is the part in the rule book which is about protests and redress hearings. Doesn't affect you on the water, of course, but it does affect you if you get into a protest. But as it says here, there's not many changes in what you do. It's just the restructuring of the numbering of that section. Much more fluid, much more flow. So that's what we're going to expect tonight. And I think we'll just keep going. Let's get started. The first section in the rule book, right at the beginning almost, is race signals. And that's where the first change is for us sailors. Race signals are the ones which come on the committee boat or sometimes on the flagpole on shore. And there's a change to the N flag. The N flag now, as you can see by the red ovals there, is clarified to mean that only races are in progress, or which are in progress, are abandoned. That word "in progress" in those 3 flag signals has been included. I think the old rules, it said under N over A and N over H, it said all races. And in the old days, there were people who were incredibly confused when it said all races were abandoned, and they got upset because they thought the race they just finished was abandoned. They thought the next race was abandoned. So the rule makers have clarified this. It's the races in progress. The race officer is not abandoning races which have already finished. The race officer is not abandoning races to come, nor the races on future days. So that's the first major change. So I'm going to hand over, I think, now to Howie, who will take us through some definitions. Howie.
Okay, thank you, Ben. So for new definitions, there are 2 new definitions in the next edition of the racing rules. They are the definition for committee and continuing obstruction. So definitions are important, so we start with talking about them. For committee, when the term is used in italic, it refers to all 3 committees in the rule. They are race committee, protest committee, and technical committee. Introduction of this new definition is to basically reduce repetition in the rules and make it easier to read. So if a specific committee is mentioned, full name will be used and it will not be in italic. Next one is continuing obstruction. So finally, the size of a continuing obstruction is defined in the rules. It is now 3 hull length of the shortest boat being referred to in the rule using the term. However, as you know, a vessel underway, a boat racing, or a race committee vessel that is also a mark are not continuing obstruction. So this part is moved from the definition of the obstruction to the definition of the continuing obstruction. Not much else to say here. Let's look at existing definitions that have been changed in the next slide. Okay, so changes are more significant on the definition of finish and mark room. So we will look at them in more details in the next few slides. The first one is finish. As you can see on the slide, 2 new sentences are added to the end of the existing definition of finish. The first sentence, after finishing, she needs not cross the finishing line completely. This is always in the rule. It is just moved from Rule 28.1 to the definition. A real and significant change is in the second sentence. So as you can see at the bottom of the slide, yeah. So SI may now change the definition to finish. This allows a race committee to describe the direction that boats shall cross the finishing line. This is supposed to be useful when the direction of finish is not clear based on what is the course side of the line. So usually it involves racing that are influenced by headland, island, or races in rivers. At the moment, we do not have a local example for this. We will keep an eye on how it is used elsewhere. However, we believe the intention of the rule change is not for a race committee to set a course to have hook finish. As we are aware, a hook finish can be potentially dangerous, as boats coming in to finish will converge with the boats that have just finished. So what is the takeaway of this? The takeaway is read your SI carefully in 2025, as it may specify the direction to finish. Ben will talk about mark room next. Ben.
Yeah, so as you say, Howie, the definition of finish there, the sailing instructions may change. So we all just have to really keep an eye on those sailing instructions. But I hope that the race committees don't start putting hook finishes into the courses. That would not be wise. Okay. Here's the definition of mark room, the old definition of mark room. And as we can see, it's a pretty bland paragraph. You know, over the last 4 years, it's caused a lot of discussion, people wondering what be round or pass a mark is necessary means, this kind of thing. So I'm going to press the spacebar now and we'll see how the new rule looks. The mark room definition has been pretty drastically cleaned up, I think made much simpler and much better. So we can see two elements there which were in the old rule: to sail to the mark when her proper course is to sail close to it, to round or pass the mark on the required side. And then they've added this one called to leave it astern. So when you're giving mark room to someone, you have to give them room to do all those three things if they need it. And the most significant part of this is the fact that we now have a definite moment when a boat's right to mark room ends. If I go back to the old rule, they had that word as necessary, and that caused a lot of problems. People really didn't know what was necessary, and therefore when should they stop giving mark room? Well, now we have the term to leave it astern, which tells us when we can stop giving mark room. Let me show you an example here. Here's a commonly confused situation over the last 4 years and previously. The yellow boat has entered the zone inside overlap of the blue boat. And in the old rules, the yellow boat, if he wanted to go around and jibe set, people weren't sure whether the yellow boat had mark room to do that. I think the new rules make it quite clear now that while yellow is jibing in position 3, she hasn't left the mark astern, she's still rounding the mark, and I think blue should have given her mark room to do that. The contact between the two is probably a case of blue failing to give mark room. At the end of the animation, you'll see that yellow's stern is clear of the mark, and I think that's when, if it ever came up, that's when the end of mark room for yellow would occur. But at least we know now clearly that yellow can make that jibe. Once again, I stress there's a lot of discussion on this rule already. So who knows whether the rule makers are going to have to come up with a casebook case to clarify what I've just said. But I think that's pretty much what they mean. All right. Anything to add on this one, Howie?
Do we have a diagram?
Oh, yeah, I think we have one more. Here we go.
Yeah, one more to show them what they should do.
So in answer to, thanks, mate. In answer to what we just talked about, the yellow boat decides she's going to jibe. She stays with the mark not clear astern. She hasn't left it astern yet, so she's entitled to the mark room. So in this diagram, blue correctly gives her the space she needs to make that turn. Blue has complied with the new rules of mark room. So that's pretty good. I quite like the new way they've written that. Alrighty, let's go on to the next one. I think over to you, Howie, just to tidy up those definitions then.
Right. Okay. So a quick summary for the two that we have talked about. For finish, the SI may change the direction in which boats are required to cross the finishing line. For mark room includes room for a boat to leave the mark astern. So how about the rest? There are also changes in the definition of obstruction and proper course when the new rules first came out. However, World Sailing issued a document on changes and correction a few days ago, and these definitions were reverted to what they were previously with only slight textual changes. So we're not going to talk about them. For the term rule, it now specified that basic principles of sportsmanship and environmental responsibility is excluded from the rules, but these principles shall not be changed anyway. So they are not rules, but they are there and they cannot be changed. So for sail the course, the term now includes start and finish in addition to the old string rule. So Rule 28.1 is pretty simplified now. There are only 6 words. A boat shall sail the course. There are other textual changes and renumbering in other definitions. They are conflict of interest, parties, and protests. We're not going to spend time on this. We will look at changes in Part 2 rules in the next section. Okay. So for Part 2 rules, the first one we're going to talk about is Rule 14, avoiding contact. So you can see it on this slide, and I'm not going to read it. But as you can see, it's a very wordy paragraph. Let's look at what the new rules looks like. Okay, good. So all the contents are still there, but it has been rearranged and the language tidied up. It is much easier to read now. So if reasonably possible, start with if reasonably possible. So a boat shall A, avoid contact with another boat. So these are existing ones. 14B and 14C are new. So it says, shall not cause contact between boats and shall not cause contact between a boat and an object that should be avoided. So it means the new rule requires us to sail with more awareness of the effect of our actions. So let's look at an example on the next slide. Okay, so yellow is being overtaken by green and blue, both of them to windward of her. So yellow luffs sharply to protect her wind and position. Blue responds by luffing, and consequently, green also luffs. As you can see, although there is no contact between blue and yellow, there is contact between blue and green. In this case, yellow does not break Rule 14A, as there is no contact between her and blue. However, yellow breaks Rule 14B, since she caused the contact between blue and green. I'm sure you can also see that in this version of the rules, additional emphasis has been placed on avoiding contact. So the takeaway is, the new rule requires us to sail with more responsibility, not only to avoid contact ourselves, but also avoid causing contact of other boats and objects. That's it for Rule 14. Let's look at 17 next.
Just before we go on to 17, I'll add in there that there's a lot of discussion on this new rule. And there's a lot of people wondering how this is going to work at marks, how this is going to work at the start, and all of this kind of thing. So it's one to keep an eye out on. But as Howie says, I think what the rule makers are trying to do is just create a bigger responsibility, a bigger feeling of responsibility to avoid boats getting into crashes. So even though you might not be in the crash, don't go ahead and cause a crash between two other boats. That's what they're saying. It's going to be interesting to see how this works in the next few months. Okay. Here we go.
Thank you. Rule 17. Okay, so just a quick refresh, yeah. The definition of the proper course is that a boat is a course that a boat shall choose in order to sail the course as quickly as possible in the absence of the other boats. And Rule 17 also says if a boat clear stern becomes overlapped to leeward of a boat on the same tack, she shall not sail above her proper course. So what is the change? The last sentence is deleted in the new rules. It means that under the new rule, as soon as the overlap begins, you shall not luff, even if the boat is still tacking above you. So what is the result? This gives the tacking boat a bit more protection, as the leeward boat is limited of what she can do a little bit earlier. Again, the intention of the rule change is to reduce the risk of contact. So let's look at the two diagrams for illustration in the next two slides. Okay, so bull on port cross in front of yellow on starboard and tack above her. Yellow luffed above close haul, her proper course, and hold her course while blue was still tacking, to prevent blue from completing her tack. So in the old rules, it was okay for yellow to do this. Blue was required by 13 to keep gear. So this is a commonly used tactics in moves in team racing or aggressive one design racing. However, under the new rules, yellow breaks rule 17, since the last sentence of 17 is deleted, and she must not sail above her proper course. For those of you that are interested in match racing, it's always allowed it, as 17 is deleted in Appendix C. So let's look at what you should do under the new rule in the next slide. Okay. So as you can see, yellow complies with the new rules by turning down to sail her proper course as soon as the overlap begins. So in short, you shall not luff a boat that is tacking above you. You simply continue to sail your proper course. Okay, easy. We can look at Rule 18 next. Okay, for Rule 18, there are major restructuring and there are some game change. We quite like this revision because the rule has a better flow now and is easier to read. There are changes in 18.2a and 18.3, which will affect your sailing, and we will talk about them next. 18.1, the rest of 18.2 and 18.4 are just renumbered with small changes, no change in content. Let's look at 18.2a first. Okay, so 18.2a is the old 18.2b with some revision. This is good, as the change is good, because it covers the most common situation upfront. When the first two boats reach the zone, if they are overlapped, outside boat shall give inside boat mark room. We all know about this, and it's not changed. How about if they are not overlapped? Okay, if they are not overlapped. Okay, under the old rules, yeah. If a boat is clear ahead, when she, the first of them, reach the zone, the boat clear astern must give mark room. But hold on. When boats are not overlapped, the first boat to the zone is not always the one clear ahead, isn't it? Let's look at the diagram on the right. In the diagram, yellow is the first to the zone, but blue is clear ahead. So technically, both boats do not have mark room at the moment yellow reaches the zone under 018.2b. It is only after blue turns towards the mark and establish an outside overlap with yellow, then yellow entitles to mark room as an inside boat under the 018.2a. So guys, this is not what the rule makers intended the rule to be. Therefore, they have rewritten it in the new 18.2a. So what is the new rule? When the first of the two boats reaches the zone, if boats are not overlapped, the boat that has not reached the zone at that moment shall give the other boat mark room. So this means, under the new rule, yellow entitles to mark room as soon as she was the first to reach the zone and the boats are not overlapped. You will notice that yellow entitles to mark room a little bit earlier and with certainty under the new rules. Okay, for those of you that are smart enough, you might say, hey, yellow will have mark room anyway. Isn't there no change in the rule application under the new rules then? So this is not true. We just used the example on the right to explain the rule change. Let's look at a situation which the rule application is different under the new rule in the next slide. Okay. In this diagram, blue reaches the zone first, but yellow was clear ahead. Okay, so same as previous slide, no boat has mark room under old 18.2b at that moment. As yellow jibed, she established inside overlap and now is entitled to mark room under 018.2a. So under the old rules, yellow ends up with mark room. However, under the new rules, blue is entitled to mark room as soon as she is the first to reach the zone and they are not overlapped. So under the new rules, very simple, blue ends up with the mark room. Right? Okay. Now, so there are difference. This is the difference. The rule is actually intended to give mark room to blue, we will say, because this is the first to reach the zone and they're not overlapped. So finally, the problem, this particular situation is finally fixed in the new rules. So where will this happen? So you might see them in dinghy race when, let's say, Ilkers and 420 are sharing the same course with, let's say, 29ers and 49ers. So the blue might be the Ilkers and 420s, and the yellow might be the 29ers and 49ers. In cube boat racing, it's even more likely, right? So for example, let's say a small cube boat with symmetric spinnaker, such as a Ruffian or Impala, meet a fast asymmetric kite boat, such as a TP52 at the Lure Mark. Right, so the takeaway is, so starting 2025, when not overlapped, the boat not yet reached the zone must give mark room. Okay? Anything to add, Ben, before I go on to 18.3?
No, I just want to take us back to the this diagram. We all grew up, didn't we, learning that the first to the zone gets mark room. That was what we got taught when we were kids, and I think from up until now we've been teaching that. But showing that diagram is really good because it shows how that's not always the case. And in this particular situation, the first to the zone doesn't should get mark room, but it's not always the one that's ahead. That's the key. So as it says at the end here, when there's no overlap, instead of thinking who's clear ahead, who's clear astern, it's more to do with who's reached the zone or not reached the zone.
Right.
So I think we have a good improvement in the Rule 18 there. Do you want to go to Rule 18.3?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Wow. It's a big paragraph, right? You can read it yourself. I'm not going to read it. So the old one, quite hard to read. So let's look at what the new one looks like. Okay. The first change is in the title. It's now called tacking in the zone instead of passing head to wind. So it now looks similar to the title of Rule 13. And the title of Rule 18.4 has also been changed, and it's now called jibing in the zone, right? So it's a good tidy up.
Well, what was it before?
It was passing head to wind in the zone for 18.3.
What about 18.4?
Now it's now tacking in the zone.
Yeah, 18.4.
18.4 is just jibing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So now it's jibing in the zone. Okay.
In the zone, yeah. Yeah, it's just tidying up. Okay, so all the words are still there for 18.3. It's just organized a bit, okay? And the changes, now it handles the case if both boats tag, but then there is a slight game change if both boats tag. Okay, let's look at the two diagram in the next slide. Okay, so right, okay. For the diagram on the left, if yellow tag and blue is fetching the mark, then 18.2 doesn't apply. So yellow must follow 18.3A and B. That is, yellow shall not cause blue to sail above close haul to avoid contact, and she shall give mark room if blue becomes overlapped inside her. 18.3, yeah, okay. Still, we are on this diagram. Okay, so in this case, as you can see, yeah, as yellow tag and squeeze in, blue has to love to avoid yellow, but we think that she did not love above close haul, so yellow is okay in this case. We are familiar with this, and there's no change. The actual game change is in the diagram on the right, when both boats tag. So let's look at it first. Okay, so 18.2 is switched off by the first sentence of 18.3. As none of them is on starboard since entering the zone, so the rest of 18.3 also does not apply. So as a result, what is applied? So because none of them has mark room, then they have to go back to the basic right of way rules. Okay, so what is the takeaway? So the takeaway is be extra careful if you tag in the zone. You will not entitled to mark room and has to follow the basic right of way rules. So that means there are a lot of limitations. Ben, anything from you?
No, I think as you said, the old rule of the left-hand diagram there is the same as it's always been. If someone's coming in on the starboard ley line and you tack, some people say to me, you can't tack in the zone, and I say, yes, you can. You just got to be careful. You've got to know the rules if you do it. And as you said, the yellow boat must not cause the blue boat to sail above close haul, which she doesn't in that diagram. She causes the blue boat to sail exactly onto close haul, but not above. And if the blue boat happened to get inside overlap, the yellow boat must give her mark room. So that's the same as it's always been, isn't it?
Exactly.
The key and the thing that wasn't handled before now is if both boats pass head to wind in the zone, tack in the zone,
right,
and they don't have any mark room rules to help them. So they would just use the old the normal basic rules, which is rule 11 for the blue boat, windward leeward. For the yellow boat, she's got to comply with rule 16.1, changing course. And both of them have to still apply, of course, with rule 14. So, yeah, it's a little bit of a change, but not that much. Excellent. Okay. Let's keep going here.
Right. Okay. So the last one we'll talk about is 20.1. Okay. So this one is pretty straightforward. Inverted commas are added to the hull, room to tag. So it is now a proper hull under the rules, and you will need to use it to ask for room to tag. So no other words can be used. Okay.
That's pretty straightforward, that one is.
Yeah. I think it's how the rule is supposed to be, right? They somehow just missed to inverted commas.
That's right. I was talking to someone not too long ago who said he heard a rumor that actually they'd meant this to be in the previous rules, but they'd sort of forgotten it or missed it or whatever. But I think they'd always intended in 20.1 that the room to tack have inverted commas, and they've only just got around to putting them in. As people would know, the only other inverted commas in the rule book, I think, are protest and UTAC.
UTAC. So we now have three proper tags, three proper hells, right?
3 hails where the words are required. Nothing else really.
Yeah. So these are all the changes in Part 2 rules that we would like to talk about. And then Ben, are you going to talk about other rules?
Yes, I shall take us through the other rules. So that's good. I mean, Rule 18 is the last sort of on the water rule of the changes. The other rules are quite important though, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Rule 40.2c, personal flotation device. In the old rules, only the Yankee flag, the Y flag, which is that yellow and red flag there, either on shore on the committee boat, the notice of race, or the SI could switch on the requirement for PFDs. That was the old rules. So what's the new change? The new rule change is that they've added in class rules. Some of you might think this is quite a minor thing. Well, there's a couple of things here. First of all, the SI and the NOR can't change the class rules without a lot of hassle. So if it's in your class rules that you must wear PFD, you're going to have to wear PFDs now at all times, according to the class rules. The other key thing here is that even if Y flag is not flying, or if the NOR doesn't say it, or the SIs don't say it, if it's in the class rules, you still need to be wearing your PFD. So there's no more arguing that the Y flag wasn't flying, that's why you weren't wearing it. If it's in your class rules, you must have it on. The takeaway, of course, is that you need to know your class rules. You need to know whether PFDs are required at all times, or if there's certain conditions when PFDs are required, because you might not get a hint or an indication you may be protested if you don't have your PFD on at the right time. Moving on. Right, for those big boat sailors, the keel boat sailors that do offshores, you'll be familiar with AIS. For those not familiar with AIS, it's like a signal which can be sent out from your boat, let other boats know what speed and what's going on with your boat. Well, you're not allowed to switch that off. In the old days, some people used to switch off their AIS and think that it would be a better way to get around your competitors because they couldn't see whether you had wind or which direction you're going. But that actually is not a very safe thing to do. The AIS is a safety tool to help people see you, and you're not allowed to switch that off. To be honest, I think most sailing instructions have been holding this rule for the last 10 years, but it's something now which they've thought is obvious and important So they brought it into the main part of the rule book. So no switching off AIS for you offshore sailors. Right. Protest contents. Yeah. Under the old rules, if you were protesting someone on your protest form, you would have to put down the protestor, the protestee, the incident, when and where the incident occurred, any rule the protester believes was broken, and the name of the protester's representative. So all of those items were required in the old rule 61.2. And if any of them were missed out, the protest committee would look at it and go, that's an invalid protest, and you wouldn't get your time to speak. Well, the new rules have trimmed the protest contents in. Remember at the beginning, I said that part 5, which is where rule 60 is in, has been renumbered. So the old rule on this subject was 61.2. The new rule is rule 60.3, and you can see that it's much more trimmed. Now, if you protest someone, you need really only to put the protestor, the protestee, and the incident. What does that mean? Well, this word, the incident, you have to write a little bit about what happened. How much do we write? Under the old, every protest committee chairman has received sometimes protests that look like huge, long essays, 2,000 words about what's happened. And to be honest, I can tell you that we don't read too much of it. You don't need to put everything in. You don't need to tell us what colored t-shirt you're wearing and all of this sort of stuff. Why do we write the incident? I think we write the incident really just to show people, show the protestee, inform the protestee which case you're talking about, so that the protestee can read it and go, yes, I remember that incident, and start preparing his defense and thinking about what he's going to say. On the other hand, I've seen some protest forms and they write something so simple, so brief, that no one really has a clue what's going on. So I think what the rule makers have done, by changing the wording of the rule to need all this, they say, now you just write the incident. What we need to do is we all need to have a bit of common sense. How much do we need just to let the protestee know what's going on? Actually, I think the incident might include some of those elements we needed before. Where and when the incident occurred. And a common example could be something like this. Imagine a keelboat race. Keelboat race around the islands, say from the harbour out to Waglan Island and back. And two boats have an incident at Waglan Island, call it a port starboard. And so the protester comes back, he writes down on his form, I had a port starboard with the other boat at Waglan Island. But he didn't write the time when the incident occurred. Remember, the old rules, that was required. When did the incident occur? He wrote where, but not when. In the old rules, the protest committee could tell him that's invalid. But I don't think he really needed to write when the incident occurred, because, well, it was at Waglan Island. These boats only went round Waglan Island once in the race. It's sort of not necessarily something that needs to invalidate the hearing. On the other hand, if we're doing windward lewards, we could go around the windward mark 3 times in the race. If we only put the windward mark, where did it happen, but we don't tell people it was the first leg or the second leg or around 3 o'clock, how can the boat remember possibly what rounding it was that the incident happened? So if you're doing a windward leeward race, you might need to put when the incident occurred. Similarly, the rule the protester believes is broken, sometimes you won't need that. Sometimes you could say, well, I had an incident with the other keelboat. The other keelboat remembers very clearly what that was the time. But if you had more than one incident with that keelboat, you'd have to tell them which incident it was. Oh, it was the port starboard that I'm talking about, not the windward leeward incident. So I think my point is that even though they have trimmed down the rule, you actually need to use some common sense and put enough information to help the protestee and the protest committee identify the time that what was going on. Howie, any comment on that one?
Yeah, so about the protester and protestee, in the old rules, you only need incident, but then you can meet the protester and protestee. You can provide that anytime before hearing. Obviously, we need those. Otherwise, we don't know. We cannot schedule a hearing. But then the old rule doesn't actually give you some flexibility. But for the new rules, it says when delivered. So when you deliver the hearing request, all three, the protester, protestee, and the incident must be in it, in writing. So needs to be careful when you submit protest. This is also a change, right?
Oh, we sometimes get a hearing request, didn't we? And it would say, I'm protesting, and then there'd be a blank on the protestee because the person had forgotten what sail number it was or something like that. And we would have to sit there wondering who you're protesting. It was very difficult. The old rules allowed that. Now the new rules, I don't think they allow that.
No,
which is
it's
smart.
pretty straight. Yeah.
Okay. So there we go. That's the protest contents, and pretty much that's all we have.
Right.
Summary to finish. We started with a summary. We'll finish with the same summary. What we've seen is a lot of renumbering. And if you go to your rule books, you'll see some full sections. Part 5 has got the change bars. The whole section's been renumbered. A lot of Rule 18 has been renumbered and reworded. Some changes to the definitions and 2 new ones. And those people who have ever done a rules session with me, I tell you the definitions at the beginning of the rule book, they're the foundations of the rule book. So if there's any section you should really try and read carefully, it's that first section. It tells you exactly the definition of the words used. But on the whole, I don't think there's many game changes. You go out and sail the race as you used to, you'll be pretty much okay. Just a couple of subtle changes here and there, which you need to be aware of. And of course, we've just mentioned the Part 5 protests and redress section has been totally revamped. But again, not many game changes. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for your time, for listening. Thank you, Howie, as well. That's all we have time for in terms of our presentation. We do have one question at the moment, which I will address. And if you have any more questions, then I'm happy to hang around a little bit. I think we've got a little bit of time. But for those of you who've got other stuff to do, that's all we have in terms of a presentation. Thank you very much indeed. So,
thank you, Ben and Howie. I'm sure everyone appreciate both your efforts. Although they are all muted, they cannot talk.
That's good. How many do we have? We got over 100, so that's probably a good thing. I'll just leave this slide up for a couple of moments. There's a couple of websites address here. There's one for World Sailing. There's one for the HKSF, and the HKSF do publish a printed version of the Racing Rules of Sailing. It should be coming out pretty soon. And there's an email address if anyone really has questions about what we've said tonight or about this new rule book. One thing I'll mention as well is the HKSF printed version includes the national prescriptions. Those are the special rules for Hong Kong sailing. So it's actually not a bad document to have available whenever you're out there.